Good afternoon. The stage is set once again in Washington as Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky arrives for his third summit with President Donald Trump amid escalating tensions in the Ukraine war. With promises of a weapons for technology exchange on the table, Zelensky seeks advanced U.S. weaponry, including long-range Tomahawk missiles. To shift the momentum against Russian forces, Trump, fresh from what he described as a constructive phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, is pushing diplomatic talks forward, including a planned meeting in Budapest aimed at ending the conflict. Against this backdrop of military aid, strategic diplomacy, and high-stakes negotiations, one question looms. Can this summit redefine the trajectory of the Ukraine war and bring lasting peace to a turbulent region, or redrawing the lines of power in Eastern Europe? Welcome to In Depth. U.S. President Donald Trump is set to meet Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky at the White House to discuss a potential sale of Tomahawk missiles capable of striking targets up to 1,550 miles away, including Russia's major cities Moscow and St. Petersburg. According to Time magazine, Trump hinted the sale might proceed if the war remains unresolved, despite Russian President Putin a strong opposition warning such a move would damage bilateral relations. Zelensky arrived in the U.S. with a detailed request for advanced weapons, including air defense systems and F-16 fighter jets. The meeting marks a significant in Trump-Zelensky relations following an earlier contentious encounter in February. The engagement coincides with a broader Western coalition committing to Ukraine's defense and potential peacekeeping forces, as well as ongoing plans for a Trump-Putin summit aimed at ending the conflict. Right, today on In Depth, we explore the complex dynamics behind the Trump-Zelensky summit and its broader implications for the war in Ukraine and global power balances. Joining us from Washington, Mr. Peter Roth, contributing editor at News Week, and from Kiev, Mr. Ivan Qnews, advisor at Ukrainian National Center. Together, they would help us illuminate the stakes of the Trump-Zelensky meeting, the possible consequences of U.S. missile support, and the prospects for the planned Trump-Putin encounter in Hungary. Good evening to you, or good afternoon to you both. And let me start here with Mr. Roth. Mr. Roth, how do you read this upcoming meeting, or this meeting between Trump and Zelensky's summit in Washington? And is Washington signaling a strategic pivot here?
I don't know. It's good to be with you again. I don't know what the strategic pivot is. We've been pretty clear. No troops on the ground. Additional aid. Now we're considering sending them Tomahawk missiles, which should make some difference. But really, I think what President Trump has in mind and has had in mind in the beginning is maximum economic sanctions against Russia, not just by the United States, but by all of the countries supporting Ukraine, so that the fuel that keeps the war machine going stops. And that particularly means Russian oil and natural gas. China is the biggest consumer. Can't do much about that, but following closely behind are India and the EU. And we can do something about their purchases of Russian oil. So I think that's the argument, that's the strategy, that's been the strategy since at least the Alaska summit, if not longer, because in order for Putin to quit, he's got to feel pressure. And I don't think the resolve exists to apply global military pressure. So it's got to be economic.
Mm-hmm. But this time we're not speaking about economy, we're speaking about technology and weaponry system at large. We'll get back to you. Let me go to Mr. Qnews. And from Kiev's perspective, how is this summit perceived? A breakthrough or a compromise?
Greetings to you, Mona. Greetings to Peter. Greetings to all audience. Thank you for invitation. Mona, of course, before every visit of President Zelensky to the Oval Office of White House, everyone tried to understand whether it will be the 2nd February, when we remember those scandalous meeting between President Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance and President Zelensky, or it will be the other meeting during this year after a very warm talk between President Trump and President Zelensky. So now it will be the 3rd meeting during this year in the White House. And from Ukrainian perspective, of course, on the one hand, it's a meeting with a big expectations. Ukraine, that thanks to the support from the United States of America and our allies, we're still in the fight on the 4th year. As Donald Trump mentioned, that hardly Russians expected when they start this full-scale war, that they expected to win in several months, that the war will last the 4th year. Nevertheless, we in this fight, we in this war, and of course, the new chapter in this war can be discussed today. I mean, Tomahawk missiles, because even under previous administration, which was more warmly oriented to Ukraine than current one, let's be frank, Ukraine never think and talk about Tomahawk missile. Now, Donald Trump like to mention those rockets. It doesn't mean that today Ukraine receive it, but at least the word Tomahawk appeared in rhetoric. It's very important, and it's pressure for Russia. We understand that Donald Trump announced his meeting with President Putin, and it means it hardly that Ukraine received something before that meeting. Nevertheless, I think that it was like serious pressure from Donald Trump to Putin. So if you will not stop this war, these rockets will be in Ukrainian hands. Okay, let's meet in Budapest. But after that meeting, like it was after Alaska, US can make more serious support of Ukraine, more serious pressure, and probably will situating in the same scenarios like it was in Anchorage in Alaska. Thank you, Mona.
Well, Mr. Wolf, you spoke about economic sanctions and that Trump from the very beginning was determined to put some economic sanctions on Russia because of the oil and because exporting the oil to China, plus other economic issues, plus, of course, the resources. Mr. Wolf, do you think Trump is leveraging Ukraine as a tool in his wider re-engagement with Russia? What do you think?
I think that Donald Trump looks at all the pieces on the board and figures out simultaneously how the different pieces can be leveraged against each other to get what he wants for the United States. And that includes the point that you just raised. Now, let me say that I don't consider sending Tomahawks to Ukraine a strategic pivot. It's a tactical change. It doesn't change the overall strategy. And I think it's important to point out that while the Tomahawks are effective and they're important, the Tomahawks that are going to go to Ukraine, according to people I've talked to in the defense community, aren't necessarily the same ones that the United States uses when we want to launch a strike. They'll be configured down a little bit because, of course, America can't take the chance that somehow the Russians get a hold of one of them and then figure out our best technology and figure out how they can be shot down. So they'll get Tomahawks that the Russian radar may be able to intercept and shoot down, maybe not. Certainly, it's an improvement in the weaponry that we've been sending them. It's a significantly scaled up improvement, but it's not the game changer that I think some people believe it could be. Trump is certainly throwing in more with Zelensky because he cannot get Putin to heel. There's a long way to go. I think that everybody's got to be clear that NATO membership's off the table for Ukraine for the foreseeable future, if not forever. And frankly, I don't think that's an unreasonable request. Remember how the system of entangled alliances sort of allowed World War I to happen on autopilot. This NATO membership and the joint, the attack on one of us, attack on all of us, Article 15, is a trigger. It's a dangerous trigger. It's perhaps now protecting the Balkans and, the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. But other than that, it's as dangerous as it is a safeguard if somebody chooses to trip that wire. And if Putin doesn't choose to trip it, some of his successors might. So again, no strategic pivot here. The primary focus is economics. The use of military force is the last and almost total resort, as we saw in Iran, as we saw what ultimately I believe helped force Hamas to make a negotiated settlement in Gaza. Trump wants to create an environment in which Putin has an incentive to settle. Doesn't have that now.
So you're speaking here about putting settlements by strength.
Yes.
Right. Mr. Oz, how does the timing of this summit post-Gaza ceasefire influence the diplomatic dynamics?
Of course, you should understand that before Gaza ceasefire, Donald Trump rather think about war in Gaza than war of Russia against Ukraine. Now, after Sharm el-Sheikh summit, when practically the war, officially, according to Donald Trump, is over, Donald Trump hold his attention to the war between Russia and Ukraine. That's why, of course, peace in Gaza was very important for Ukraine, because we understand that it spread attention of Donald Trump. And when finally, we believe that it will be, because we know history of Middle East and the conflict there, but at least if it will be long peace, it means that the United States of America will pay more attention to Ukraine, to war of Russia against Ukraine, and think what to do for actually achieving the peace in Ukraine, like it was achieved actually in Gaza. And Donald Trump actually now, as for me, in his rhetoric, talk more about Ukraine, and really the appearance of word Tomahawk in this discussion. For me, it's something like materialization of the principle of peace through force. So when he said to Vladimir Putin, and probably he said it to him if they will meet in Budapest, because I'm still not believe that Putin so easily agreed to be in the capital of the European Union country. I actually always remind about order of the crime international crime court on Mr. Putin. Yes, we know that Mr. Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, he said that he ignored such thing, and he ignored it in several months ago when Prime Minister Netanyahu visited Budapest. So quite possible that he ignored it in case of President Putin will be in Budapest. But first of all, Putin should understand that for being in Budapest, he should appear on the above the territories of the countries which actually want to arrest him, and especially a territory above Ukraine. So hardly he chooses way. Nevertheless, now one of the main arguments that Donald Trump used in this meeting, that you see, we're talking about Tomahawk or some other weapon. So if you will not agree to stop this war, theoretically, Donald Trump can say, I can give to Ukraine several Tomahawks, including the Griffon launching system. It's very important because a lot of people said that, oh, the Tomahawk rocket that was invented in the year of 1983, oriented for sea, for military ships, not for land, but U.S. Several, even previous week, U.S. presented Griffon system at the wheels for launching the Tomahawks. So quite possible that such systems could appear in Ukraine. It will. I joke that it's HIMARS Plus. So like U.S. give to us HIMARS, and that was the only actually game changer in the war of Russia against Ukraine.
Exactly. Mr. Hus, let me take it from here to Mr. Roth. And indeed, as Mr. Hus is speaking about, reports suggested that the mention of Tomahawk is being used as leverage to bring Putin to the negotiating table. What do you think of that?
I don't think the threat to use a new class of weapons in Ukraine or to give a new class of weapons to Ukraine brings Putin to the table. I think the use of a new class of weapons by Ukraine from the United States is what brings Putin to the table. This is not a hollow threat. This is not a negotiating deal. This is a commitment, and it's a commitment that America is going to help Ukraine.
Mr. Roth, what kind of commitment? We're speaking here about weapons for technology, unconventional weapons. So what kind of what do you see of this matter? We're not speaking about kind of weapons or heavy weapons. We're speaking about unconventional weapons here. So what do you think of that?
And if you're asking me to talk about other kinds of unconventional weapons, that's a little bit beyond my level of expertise. What I'm saying here is that the threat to provide Tomahawks or other non-traditional weapons, things beyond tanks and guns, things that are smart weapons that evade radar detection, that come in stealthily. The threat to do that isn't going to make Putin do anything. We're actually going to have to do that. I believe Donald Trump is at this point committed to doing that. And once those weapons turn up in the field, if they make a change in the war on the ground, that increases the pressure on Putin to settle. Putin has a very high, like Trump, Putin has a very high tolerance for risk. That's because he's an autocratic dictator. He doesn't have to worry about answering to the Russian people. he doesn't have to worry about answering to advisors. He may have to answer to the oligarchs who help him stay in power, because if he does something that causes them to start losing money, they may find a convenient window for him to fall out of.
But
beyond that,
President Trump to get back or to respond back to his internal the Congress and his internals, if he is giving weapons, unconventional weapons to Ukraine, and would be escalating the rhetoric of war, and then will he get back?
If you're asking me if he has to ask Congress for permission to send the Tomahawks, I don't believe he does. He may, but I suspect the support for it in Congress is there. The area where Mr. Trump has the most difficulty politically here in the United States is among his base.
He doesn't even have to answer back to his people, right? So we're speaking here about equal.
That's what I'm alluding to. Is the place where he has the most political difficulty is in that portion of his base of the Trump voters who don't believe that Ukraine is a quote America First issue. That's how Trump puts his imprimatur on something. If people have questions, they made it very clear that Gaza was an America First issue, which meant we ought to be here, we ought to do something. Mm-hmm. He hasn't really said that much about Ukraine, if he said it at all. His advisors and his surrogates don't say that. They don't define the war in Ukraine as being something that America needs to be concerned about. I disagree. I think we ought to be concerned about everything the Russians do, because the Russians are not our friends. The Russians have never been our friends, even during the Second World War, or the Great Patriotic War, as they call it. They weren't our friends. They were spying us, stealing our technology, and making plans on how they were going to outgame us in the post-war period once the Nazis and Hitler were defeated. Okay?
But
bad guys.
Mm-hmm. But that was not exactly what Mr. Trump said when he spoke of Putin as a friend. And reports suggested of good relations between both leaders. We'll get back to that. Let me go to Mr. Us. And Mr. Us, the offer of weapons for technology sounds unconventional. How does it fit Trump's America First framework from your point of view?
Look, first of all, Donald Trump wants to advertise American weapon. So using this weapon in war is the best advertisement. So, Ukraine made a very good advertisement to American Patriot system, because everyone knows that they can destroy the cruise missiles, but was a question about ballistic missiles. And Ukraine actually started to do that. Furthermore, we start to hit hypersonic missiles. A lot of people before the full-scale war between Russia and Ukraine was not sure whether Patriot system can destroy hypersonic missiles, but Ukraine started to do that. And that's why, of course, it's a good advertisement. Furthermore, if we are talking about Tomahawks and those systems like Griffon for launching them, I think it so could be a good advertisement for actually the US military campaigns who produced those weapons. We should understand that if it, in theory, no one knows whether it's good or bad. But if it demonstrates itself in the battlefield, of course, it's the best manifestation of pluses or minuses and understanding of companies that produce this weapon, what is pluses and what is minuses of this weapon. That's why US can have the interest in giving or selling this weapon according to Pearl program to their NATO partners, especially from Europe, because only two NATO countries that is not in Europe, actually the United States of America and Canada, so mainly European countries in NATO. So, and they can give it to Ukraine, and then US can check how it works and so on and so forth. So if someone says that it's red line, approximately a year ago, it was a good calculation. Unfortunately, I don't remember the source. It was New York Times or another influential US magazine or newspaper, that 36 red lines was crossed during this war. When Russia say you should not do that, US do that, and there was no consequences. Like it was no consequences actually when Turkey in 2016 shut down Russian fighter jet, because Turkey said, please don't violate our airspace. Russia ignored that request, and Turkey shut down it. After that, we have practically 10 years when Russia is non-violating Turkey airspace, unlike European countries. It's about potential reaction of Europe for violation of the airspace. So Turkey demonstrating that there will be no further reaction, because Russia like to provoke, but Russia is not ready to respond if the response will be on the actions. So we will see. But now, returning to your question, I think that, well, it can be very good advertisement, and not only of Tomahawk, but some other weapons that U.S. military companies produce, and that could be tested at the war of Russia against Ukraine on Russian side. Thank you, Mona.
Right, Mr. Us, we have to say here that red lines were crossed by both sides several times. Mr. Wolf, as we spoke that before, particularly in his first term, and then reiterated that relations between Trump and Putin were, both of leaders were on good terms. Now, Trump described his phone call with Vladimir Putin now as constructive. How significant is that wording at this particular stage, and at the backdrop of him meeting Zelensky and all the circumstances?
Well, I find it amusing, the number of people who seem to be bothered by the fact that Trump says nice things about Putin and President Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China and Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, who are all people who have things he wants, have negotiations he wants to do. If you call somebody a running cur and a junkyard dog, they're not going to want to sit down and negotiate with you. They're not going to want to have a conversation. They're gonna put you in a box and say, you're an unpleasant person. You don't like me. I don't want to deal with you. So of course he's going to say nice things to Putin, and he's going to treat him like a visiting head of state when he arrives in Alaska, and take him for a ride in the presidential limousine, and plan an elaborate lunch that ultimately, I suppose, gets canceled. But that's part of the negotiation. This is what Trump, if you read the books, Trump prides himself on his skill as a negotiator over just about every other attribute he has. He thinks he's a better negotiator than he is a better businessman, than he's a better builder, than he's a better visionary, that he's the king of negotiation, undisputed world champion. And that means buttering up the guy on the other side of the table, flattering him, saying nice things about him, and saying to his mother, to get what you want, well, then he'll do it. It's part of the strategy.
Right. So you just think that this is a kind of diplomacy that President Trump is using here. But
if you want to call it diplomacy, then I'm happy to.
What do you think it is? What do you think it is? If it's not diplomacy,
well, I don't think of Trump as being very diplomatic personally, or as being a diplomat. He's not. He's a businessman. Diplomats have a way of talking. Politicians have a way of talking. Lawyers have a way of talking. Trump is none of those. He wants people to think that he speaks the plain language of America.
Right.
That he represents what some pundits in America refer to as flyover country. Not the elites on the East and the West Coast, but the rest of the country, the hardworking men and women who get up every morning and put in 8 hours to put food.
Very clear, Mr. Peter. Very clear. Well, Mr. Peter Roth and Mr. Ivan Qnews, we thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us today in depth. And this summit may well redefine the complex chessboard of the Ukraine war. So many thanks for joining us here to unpack its implications. And until next time, stay informed and engaged. That brings us to the end of today's episode. For In Depth, many thanks for joining us.